In March 1942, a storefront in Oakland carried a hand-painted sign with 4 words, "I am an American." Dorothea Lange photographed it for a federal agency. Soon afterward, the business closed under orders aimed at people of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast. The same government that hired Lange to make a record of this removal kept much of her WRA work out of public distribution during the war. That fact is real. So is a second fact that changes the case. The claim that every one of these photographs stayed locked in a federal vault for almost 60 years is not supported by the archive. The question is not whether official censorship happened. It did. The question is what was withheld when the restriction ended and why the simplified story circulates. Welcome to History Case Files. This is the record behind the photograph, the policy, and the myth. The photograph is spare. A large painted sign fills the front window of a business. Beneath the sign is the structure of a storefront, glass, a doorway, street numbers, and a place that had been open for customers. Lange made the photograph in Oakland in March 1942. The National Archives holds the negative. A copy is also held by the Library of Congress. The catalog does more than preserve the words on the sign. It identifies the business as the Wanto Company at 401 through 403 8th Street at Franklin Street. The store belonged to the Matsuda family. According to research cited by the Library of Congress, Tatsuro Matsuda, a University of California graduate, commissioned and put up the sign on December 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor. The original caption gave the location incorrectly as 13th and Franklin. Later research using business directories and other records corrected it to 8th and Franklin. That correction matters. A photograph can become famous while a basic detail in its caption remains wrong. The catalog also records what happened to the business. It closed after orders directed people of Japanese descent to leave specified West Coast areas. The wording on the sign was not a response added years later by a museum or an editor. It was present in the shop window before the forced removal. The photograph, therefore, gives us a dated piece of evidence, a family-owned business, a public statement of national belonging, and a government policy that was about to make that statement powerless in practice. The story is often told with a single unnamed shopkeeper standing for an entire community. The record permits greater precision. It identifies the Matsuda family, the store, the address, the photographer, the month, and the federal collection in which the negative was filed. It does not record a private conversation at the window. It does not tell us what any member of the family said after Lange left. A reliable account stops there instead of borrowing emotion from the photograph. The force of the photograph comes from its documentary conflict. It joins a declaration of American identity to a policy that did not judge people one by one in a courtroom. In the months that followed, families had to report under military exclusion orders, pass through temporary detention facilities, and enter a system administered by the War Relocation Authority. The sign did not prevent that process. It opens a case file about official documentation, wartime control, and a later archival myth that still misleads viewers today. That matters now. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. The order did not name Japanese Americans. Its language authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders to designate military areas and exclude people from them. That legal wording mattered because it did not announce on its face a confinement program for one ancestry. In practice, military orders on the West Coast imposed curfews and exclusion rules on people of Japanese descent. It created no individual court process before people were targeted by those later military exclusion orders. The result was forced removal on a vast scale. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library states that Executive Order 9066 led to the incarceration of about 120,000 people of Japanese descent during the war, including about 80,000 American citizens. Other official sources report citizen totals based on records and definitions counted. The essential fact does not change. Citizenship did not protect tens of thousands of people from removal and confinement because of Japanese ancestry. The machinery of removal did not operate in one step. Notices and military exclusion orders told families when to report and what areas they had to leave. People were sent first to temporary assembly facilities, many at fairgrounds and racetracks. The government called the next stage relocation. The label cannot erase that people were compelled to leave homes and businesses, then confined behind fences and under guard. The War Relocation Authority, created in March 1942, administered the federal incarceration program at 10 remote camps. The 10 sites were in California, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, with no camps in other states. Manzanar and Tule Lake were in California. Hart Mountain was in Wyoming. Minidoka was in Idaho. Topaz was in Utah. Gila River and the Colorado River site, commonly called Poston, were in Arizona. Grenada, later known as Amache, was in Colorado. Rower and Jerome were in Arkansas. Forced removal from the coast continued into camps far from the original communities. The surviving paperwork is extensive. There are exclusion notices, registration records, family data, property files, photographs, and administrative reports. That volume can create a false sense of order. A government can document an action in detail and still deny due process to the people affected by it. The National Archives notes that the WRA operated 10 incarceration camps, holding more than 100,000 people forcibly removed from the West Coast. The paper trail is proof of administration, not proof of justice. Lange's work enters the record during the early phase, when the policy moved from authorization to enforcement. Her photographs show neighborhoods before forced removal, people at assembly facilities, and life inside the WRA camps. They do not show a secret operation uncovered by an outsider. They show a federal photographer documenting a federal program. That is the next contradiction. The state commissioned evidence of what it was doing, yet during the war, it withheld much of the evidence that most clearly exposed the human cost of its program. The official language used at the time is part of that contradiction. Evacuation suggested emergency protection. Relocation suggested an ordinary change of residence. Evacuee turned an individual into an administrative category. These words appear in original captions and files, so they belong in the historical record, but they cannot be repeated without explanation. The subjects of the photographs were not choosing a move. They were people of Japanese descent being forced from their homes and placed into confinement by the United States government. Dorothea Lange was not a secret photographer who entered prohibited zones. The WRA hired her to document its program, and she worked under its assignment. Her photographs sit in the agency's central record. The federal WRA also hired Clem Albers and Francis Stewart. This was not a private album discovered after the war. It was an official federal record created while the program operated. By 1942, Lange had a documentary career shaped by the Great Depression. Her work for New Deal agencies focused on people affected by unemployment, migration, and farm labor conditions. It directed attention from systems to belongings, lines, signs, and public institutions. That background helps explain her WRA subjects. It cannot prove what she privately intended in every frame. The surviving record tells us what the assignment covered. The WWRA hired Lange and other photographers to document Japanese American neighborhoods, processing centers, and camp facilities. The resulting series includes people at home before removal, people at assembly centers, activities in the 10 WRA camps, military service by Nisei men and women, and property formerly owned by Japanese Americans. That scope was administrative. It created a record of a federal project, from preparation through confinement and later resettlement activity. But an administrative assignment does not dictate every subject placed inside a frame. In Lange's WRA work, a sign, an identification tag, a closed store, a row of luggage, unfinished barracks, a school ceremony, wire fencing, or a guard tower can carry evidence that an office report would reduce to a phrase. Her photographs did not need a fictional narrator to establish that people were being processed. The tags, the orders, the fences, and the buildings were already visible facts. There were limits. Lange did not control the policy. She did not decide which people had to leave. She did not control the government's wartime distribution of the finished photographs. Nor does the archive give a complete internal explanation for every restriction placed on every print or negative. This matters because a familiar story turns her into a lone rebel with a camera, entering a camp without permission, and smuggling out forbidden proof. That story is more dramatic than the record. It is also less revealing. The documented reality is harder to dismiss. An agency responsible for incarceration employed a photographer whose work recorded the process in human and material detail. Her employment placed her inside the state's information system. The later withholding demonstrates that employment did not guarantee free circulation. The archive preserves both sides at once: commission and control. That tension is why the Lange collection belongs at the center of this case. If the photographs had been made only by an independent observer, officials might have dismissed them as hostile opinion. Instead, they were federal records. The government had paid for their creation, received the negatives and prints, organized them in an official series, and later transferred the series to the National Archives. The question is not whether officials knew their content. The government possessed them. The question is which aspects of the program were suitable for public distribution during wartime and which were not. The answer has to remain precise. We have evidence that the bulk of Lange's WRA photographs was withheld from public distribution during the war. We do not have a public file explaining every individual decision, every handling mark, or every person who reviewed a print. That boundary between established fact and unanswered detail is not a weakness in the investigation. It is the reason the archive must be read carefully. Lange's photographs do not offer one single setting. They follow a process. In Oakland, the Wanto Company storefront records a business under the shadow of exclusion orders. Its sign makes a public claim of American identity. The later catalog notes tell us that the business closed after the orders directed people of Japanese descent to leave. This is not an abstract policy shown through a map. It is a commercial address, a family business, and a dated federal photograph. Other photographs place the process on people's bodies and belongings without giving us authority to invent what anyone felt. In Hayward, California, Lange photographed members of the Machida family waiting for an evacuation bus in May 1942. The original caption explains that identification tags were used to keep a family unit together during the stages of removal. It also identifies the family's nursery and 5 greenhouses on a 2-acre property in Eden Township. The tag has a narrow administrative function in the caption. In the larger record, it also marks a shift from household identity to government processing. Lange photographed crowds, families, and individuals at departure points. Catalogs may give a place, date, group description, or federal category, but not always a name. A responsible narration cannot assign names, relationships, citizenship, or private reactions where the record does not. That is a crucial archival problem. A policy is carried out through households, yet its surviving paperwork often preserves the rule more clearly than the person subject to it. Lange's photographs counter that imbalance without eliminating it. They register presence at a particular moment. The catalog gives only what it can substantiate. Names, kinship, citizenship, and later outcomes must come from records outside the frame. Luggage recurs throughout the record. Suitcases, bundles, blankets, household equipment, and tags appear in federal photographs of removal. People had to reduce a home to what they could carry or move through government channels. A photograph cannot measure the full loss. It establishes material restriction, while property files and testimony add further evidence. At temporary assembly facilities, Lange documented people who had left their homes but had not reached WRA camps. These were holding sites, not ordinary transit stations. National Archives material records later camps as fenced and guarded, with several families sometimes sharing tar-papered Army-style barracks. The policy continued beyond a bus or train into confinement. At Manzanar, Lange photographed barracks during early construction and occupation. One general view shows rows of barracks across a cleared fire break. Other records show fences and guard towers. With administrative files, the photographs establish a camp of housing blocks, service buildings, roads, boundaries, and surveillance. Relocation center is government language. The physical record is a camp for people removed by military orders. Those details matter because restraint can be physical and bureaucratic at the same time. The archive records both forms. Neither needs exaggeration for the viewer. Her work also records school settings, work, ceremonies, and community activity. These scenes do not make the system benign. A classroom does not cancel a fence, and a group photograph does not cancel an exclusion order. Yet a fair account cannot erase the agency of people who built institutions, maintained families, and created daily routines under conditions they did not choose. The photographs establish those routines. Fuller personal histories require testimony and other records. Visual evidence has limits. A photograph can establish a tag, line, barrack, flag ceremony, or guard tower. It cannot prove private belief or explain national policy alone. Orders, reports, court records, personal papers, and oral histories supply wider context. Lange's work gives those sources human scale and a place in time. Other photographers also worked for the WRA. Lange's photographs are central to this case, but the archive contains separate creators, captions, dates, and identifiers. One powerful frame may open a case, it cannot close it alone. Why, then, were so many federal photographs withheld during the war? The National Archives gives a clear answer to the central point. The bulk of Lange's WRA photographs was withheld from public distribution during World War II. That is not a rumor built from a missing box or a social media caption. It is the conclusion stated by an archivist in the National Archives' own correction of the later 60-year story. The same source says the withholding ended after the war. The word bulk matters. It does not mean every photograph Lange made. It does not tell us that every negative received the same treatment. It does not provide a complete item-by-item list of what was shown, what was held back, and who made each decision. A documentary that says every Lange photograph was banned would replace a verified fact with a larger falsehood. Why would photographs be withheld? There is evidence and there is interpretation. The evidence is that the government was carrying out forced removal and incarceration while retaining the photographs within its own WRA files. The National Archives archivist described the WRA as conducting removal, confinement, and later resettlement activities that the federal government was not eager to publicize. That assessment comes from the archive's historical explanation, not from an invented memo assigned to a nameless official. The interpretation begins with what the photographs show. A closed business conflicts with an account that reduces the policy to orderly administration. Identification tags on family members, belongings prepared for transport, temporary holding sites, unfinished barracks, wire fencing, and guard towers make coercion visible. These subjects could challenge wartime language presenting the process as evacuation or relocation. It is reasonable to say that such photographs could complicate the official presentation. It is not responsible to claim, without a specific record, that a particular official saw a particular frame and wrote down that reason for suppressing it. That distinction protects the real story. The historical injury is serious enough without turning the archive into a conspiracy thriller. Public distribution was controlled while people were still being removed and confined. The federal government did not need to erase every negative to limit what the public encountered. It only needed to decide which materials would circulate widely, which would remain in agency files, and which official words would define the program. The government's own captions are part of this information system. They often use evacuee, evacuation, and relocation center. In a catalog, those terms can help researchers find the original record. In narration, they require context because they frame coercion as movement rather than confinement. Repeating them without explanation can preserve the language of the policy while obscuring the policy's force. There is another reason to avoid simple claims about censorship. Other WRA photographs did circulate in some form, and the WRA's entire photographic series contains work by multiple photographers, subjects, and purposes. The existence of publicly available wartime material does not disprove that the bulk of Lange's work was withheld. It does show why the exact scope must be stated carefully. This was a system of selective control, not a single locked door with one answer. That is the tension at the center of Lange's photographs. They were made inside an official assignment. They preserved facts that could challenge an official story. Their wartime withholding was real, but the later claim that the federal record then vanished from public reach for generations confuses a wartime act of control with the history of post-war archives. The next part of the file separates those two timelines. Viral posts claim Lange's photographs were hidden for 60 years and only discovered in the early 21st century. The claim wrongly merges wartime withholding with post-war access. The first is established. The second does not support a secret vault story. National Archives records say Lange's WRA photographs were transferred from the Department of the Interior in June 1946 within Record Group 210, Series G. The series has 7,870 prints and corresponding negatives. Lange's work is part of it, not her personal total. The accession dossier recorded no restriction on public use. That does not mean everyone knew the series existed, could travel to an archive, or knew how to request material. It does mean the archive did not hold it under a public use ban for 60 years. The history of access has stages. A record can be formally open, yet remain hard to encounter. Researchers may need to know that a series exists, locate its call number, visit a reading room, request prints, and connect them to a broader history. That is very different from a record being absent, sealed, or legally inaccessible. Confusing those conditions produces a more dramatic story, but a less accurate one. The Library of Congress describes another stage in 1972 when the Whitney Museum incorporated 27 Lange photographs into Executive Order 9066, an exhibition about Japanese American incarceration. The exhibition did not create the photographs or break a 60-year legal seal. It brought selected work into a prominent public setting and helped widen the audience for it. The same year, a book under that title placed work by Lange and other photographers before readers. Digital access changed the scale again. The National Archive says all of Lange's WRA photographs have been available in scanned form on its website since 1998. Scanning did not alter the original wartime decision. It changed the practical ability of people outside an archival reading room to search and reproduce the material. A person encountering the collection online years later may genuinely experience it as a discovery. That personal discovery is not evidence that the photographs had never been available before. The source of the myth is itself documented. The National Archives traces a major version of the claim to a newspaper article published in November 2006. That article reported a purported discovery of previously neglected Lange photographs. The idea spread through later articles and online posts. Repetition gave the story authority. But repetition cannot override the accession record from 1946. The public use status, the 1972 exhibition, or the scanned collection available since 1998. The correction does not minimize censorship. It restores its actual timeline. During the war, much of the work was withheld from public distribution. After the war, the collection entered the National Archives without public use restrictions. Over decades, researchers used it, exhibitions showed part of it, and digitization made it easier to reach. The truth is less convenient than a single claim of suppression, followed by a cinematic discovery. It is also stronger because every part can be checked against the record. An archive does not speak by itself. It preserves photographs with captions, numbers, dates, creator names, and institutional labels. Each part can contain evidence. Each part can also carry the language of the office that created it. The Lange collection makes this plain. The negative of the Oakland storefront has an official identifier. The Library of Congress record explains that an earlier location in the caption was wrong and gives the corrected street address. Without that catalog work, a famous photograph would continue to circulate with a basic factual error. Captions can also narrow or redirect what viewers notice. A WRA caption may call someone an evacuee. That tells us how the agency categorized the person. It does not settle how historians should describe the government action. Evacuation can sound like protection from danger. Relocation can sound voluntary or routine. In this case, the modern context is forced removal and Japanese American incarceration. Keeping both layers visible is more honest than silently adopting the government's euphemisms or deleting the original record. This distinction also explains why broad public awareness arrived unevenly. An unsealed photographic series in 1946 was not the same as a widely taught national history. A museum exhibition in 1972 was not the same as digital access. A digitized catalog in 1998 was not the same as a viral post reaching millions. Each stage changed who could find the photographs, how easily they could be shared, and what story attached to them. That is why every History Case Files episode should place the source directly beside the claim, the archive name, date, collection, and precise identifier. Viewers can test a caption instead of trusting a label such as forbidden. Corrections should remain visible: the claim, the record that changes it, and the point where the record ends. That last point matters. A viral caption can preserve one truth and damage another. These photographs were withheld during the war is supported. The government hid every photograph for 60 years is not. Both sentences can be used beside the same Lange frame. Only one respects the record. The difference is not a minor correction. It changes how viewers understand censorship, institutions, and the work required to verify a claim. The archive also leaves limits. It cannot give us the exact administrative reasoning for every photograph's treatment. It cannot tell us how many people saw each print at every stage. It cannot convert a photograph into a complete biography of every person within it. Those gaps do not authorize invention. They tell us where certainty ends. A trustworthy history names that boundary and then returns to what is documented. The facts are clear. Many of Dorothea Lange's photographs for the War Relocation Authority were withheld from public distribution during World War II. The federal government had hired Lange to document a program that forcibly removed and incarcerated people of Japanese descent. Her surviving work records, businesses, tags, belongings, temporary facilities, barracks, fences, guard towers, and daily life within that system. The myth is also clear. The entire collection was not secretly locked away and inaccessible for almost 60 years. The WRA photographic file entered the National Archives in June 1946 without public use restrictions. Lange's photographs appeared in a major 1972 exhibition, and the National Archives says her WRA work has been available online in scanned form since 1998. The unknown remains important. The archive does not supply an item-by-item explanation for the wartime handling of every negative or print. It does not allow us to invent an order for every photograph. The final verdict is therefore precise. Wartime withholding was real. The 60-year vault story is misleading, and the evidence is the record itself. If this changed how you read history, like the video and subscribe to History Case Files. Next case begins where captions end.